Hi good people, welcome to Devs&Dice. My name is Leif, and today is a special episode of Boxes of Shame. Now, sometime back, I contacted Brent over at Goobertown Hobbies, who introduced me to Casey over at eBay Miniature Rescues. Now, Casey had a brilliant idea for a collaboration. The main idea was that we would show progress. The ideal version of this would be, for instance, to show off our first mini that we ever painted, then sort of repaint it today with all of the knowledge and skills and whatnot that we had acquired since we started. Well, I only started painting about 1.5 or 2 years ago. So, going into this collaboration, I was excited, but I also felt a great deal of fear. Some of the guys that were involved in this collaboration had been painting minis for decades. I'll be honest, in my darkest moments leading up to this collaboration, I really lost faith. I started doubting myself. I doubted what I had learned over the course of such a short time. I was nowhere as good as these other people. I was in way over my head. I just wanted to run away and hide. I even started making up excuses in my head, in preparation of flight. My fingers hurt. My eyes can't look or see something. The dog ate my computer. You know what? Sweden has been invaded by Russia. Then I remembered why I started this series called Boxes of Shame. It wasn't because I was a great painter. It was to inspire me to paint my grey armies of minis, and hopefully in the process, I would inspire others to do the same. I looked over some of the comments on YouTube and on Facebook, and honestly, the love and support I got from my viewers really inspired me and reminded me that what I am doing is greater than my ego, and that by showing how I paint, it's okay to paint regardless of your skill level. We all start from somewhere. I even remembered a quote from the great one, Wayne Gretzky. It goes something like, "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take." On a high of positive energy, I managed to find my miniature, which I painted over 2 years ago. So on to today's repaint of the Griffin from Nolzur's Marvelous Miniatures. Alright good people, so this is my old painted Griffin. I remember thinking that this was the pride of my miniature painting skills way back when. So this was, I think, approximately 1.5 or 2 years ago. I basically base coated the mini, and then I remember some guys at work spoke about this mythical thing called washes. So that was what I used, and I remember thinking that once the wash was on, like, oh my god, this looks so good. This was truly liquid talent. You can also see that the base was totally warped. Also, there's like a ton of mold lines all over the model. But I didn't know honestly what to do to fix it. And I do, however, remember that I think I coated the model with some matte varnish just to sort of seal the colors. Let's look at that new model. So the packaging looked like it's been through hell, and I picked out the model, and of course, the tail was broken off. So I guess we're off to a great start. I started to remove some of the mold lines using various tools of the trade like files, knives and such. I decided to put the model in a bath of super green for the night to get the most of the primer off. Just make sure that you dry the mini. And with that done, I just attached the tail again using super glue. It's not the cleanest seam, but it'll do. Now I wanted to try out using some cork for the base. I got my cork from IKEA, and it's called Avskild in Sweden, and it's fairly cheap. You get like a pack of 4 of these for 10 kroners, which is like $1 or something. I broke it into small pieces and I wanted to try to build up the base in a very sort of organic style and a sort of fantasy-esque plateau where the Griffin could stand and look over the lands or something like that. As you can see, I'm using quite a lot of superglue to attach the pieces and building it up level by level. Also, remember it's good practice to now and again dry fitting it, making sure that there's enough land, so to speak, for the model or for the mini to stand. In my case, I didn't have enough land, so I actually had to glue pieces of cork to the side, so it became a sort of nice overhang, which I liked because it just made it even more fantasy-esque. And in order to make the glue bond quicker, I just sprayed on some activator. Once the base felt secure, I put the Griffin on and whammo, there it is. It looked okay, but I wasn't very happy with the texture of the cork, so I decided to give it a coat with some more gritty texture, and I used PVA glue and my gravel sand mixture. Then once all of the sand is in place, I diluted some of the PVA glue with water and put it on carefully to ensure that everything holds. Once that had dried, I gave the mini a zenithal prime, first with some black primer and then some white primer coming in from above. The first color I'm using is a heavy ochre from Vallejo. I think this is the same color I used on my old paint scheme, but it is really a nice sort of liony color, and I also decided to use some of it on the beak and the talons of a Griffin. I added some off-white and heavy sienna to my wet palette. The heavy sienna will do the bulk of the work to serve as a base coat for the eagle parts of the Griffin. The paint is diluted quite a lot with water to ensure that I don't cover up those nice feather details. I decided to mix up some of that heavy ochre color with some of that off-white to create an even brighter version. I looked at some photos and videos of lion, and a lot of lions have a brighter color between their legs and then leading up to the abdominal and chest region. I mixed up some off-white, heavy sienna and some yellow ochre to try to create a brighter fade on the chest and legs on the eagle part of the Griffin. I'm using a stippling kind of technique to get paint on in a more organic way. Here I'm just putting in some initial highlights on the talons and then some on the beak. And here I'm coming in with some of that heavy sienna, and I'm going to, no pun intended, feather out the edges a bit to create a bit more visual interest. Also, let's not forget the end of the tail that also gets a bit of a yellow to blur out the lines. The actual head of the Griffin gets a coat of a very diluted off-white color. Now I'm coming in with some pure black. The idea here was to add some black around the beak and around the eyes. It looks like bad makeup, but it will make sense soon. And of course, since I had the black out, I painted the actual talons black as well. I also added some black to the end of the tail, which I feathered out. Here I'm adding some heavy gold brown to the palette. This color is essentially a more yellow version of the previous ochre color. Here I'm trying to put in some very rough highlights on the yellow bits, the lion parts and the beak. I added several layers to increase the brightness bit by bit. At this point the black had dried and I could move in with some off-white to clean up the black details on the head of a griffin. I'm going to come in with some bloodstone from Privateer Press P3 paint line, which is sort of a rust color. I'm just coming in at the top of the wings and then trying to blur that out. At this point I had decided that I wanted to paint the outer feathers in the same off-white color. The main reason for this was so that there would be some more interesting visual elements, but also because I wanted to call attention to the wings and make the griffin, I guess, appear larger. After all of the coats had dried, I came in with some soft tone wash from Army Painter. I think this is where I stopped last time around when I drenched the poor bird in wash. This time around I still covered the entire model, but I was much more aware of pooling and tide marks and such, so I managed the amount much better. While the wash was drying, I saw a chance to expedite the painting process a bit by starting to hit the base with a coat of Celestra Grey from Citadel. Now I'm using that bloodstone color again, and I'm starting to pick out individual feathers on the back and also on the bottom of the wings. This gives the wings a little bit more sort of a pop and contrast. Here I am again reinforcing the highlights that I previously did on the line parts of the mini. And of course the talons also gets another round of highlights. Here I'm coming in with some Heartfire, a warm yellow color from Privateer Press. I did an additional highlight pass on the line parts and then on the talons. Mixing a bit of the Heartfire and Bloodstone colors gave me a very nice highlight for the feathers on the wings. This I only did on the upper side of the wings. Here I'm coming in with some of the off-white, and I'm basically trying to give the white feathers a bit more contrast. You can see that I'm trying my best not to hit all parts of the feathers. I'm essentially trying not to hit the middle of the white feathers. I'm going to paint the head in a similar sort of way to get the head to pop a little bit more. And here I almost forgot the bottom parts of the wings. Then as a final highlight I just added some more off-white at the very tips of the white feathers. Since I had some of that white on the wet palette, I mixed it with some black to get a grey for the highlights on the talons. That dried quickly, so I came in with another pass of highlights. This time I chose to do it in an almost sort of serrated pattern. Here I'm gonna paint in the pupils, which at first went well, until I saw that the poor beast's eyes were entirely misaligned and it looked like a homage to Marty Feldman. So back in with some yellow to cover up the pupils and then try again. And this time it looked much better. I came in with some Cygnus yellow on the beak, but unfortunately the color was way too cold, which I will fix soon. Meanwhile, I decided to feather out the bottom of the white head by using some diluted heavy sienna and bloodstone. And then I came back in with some off-white just to sort of clean up some of the parts to make sure that the head had a nice fade. Here I'm coming in with some Army Painter's Dark Tone, which is a black wash. I started with a detail brush but realized soon that in order to expedite this process a little bit faster, I needed a larger brush for the bulk of the work. I did, however, use a detailed brush again when needed. I decided to be brave here. I'm mixing a little bit of the Bloodstone and the Heartfire colors on my wet palette. I start out with the Bloodstone on the beak. Then I come in with the mix. And finally with a more pure Heartfire yellow color. I'm liking this. While I had the Heartfire yellow, I did some additional highlights on the talons and on the lion body. Here I'm coming in with some black just to paint the claws on the lion parts. Now I shifted focus to the base. I knew I wanted to set the Griffin in a somewhat lush environment. The first step for me was to come in with some olive green color from Vallejo. Here I'm sort of doing an overbrush but sort of stippling the paint into where I wanted some greenery to be. Then I came in with the second pass of an even brighter green for some variation. This was Commando Green from Army Painter. Once that had dried, it was time to give the base a bit of a dry brush. The paint I decided to go with was Brain Matter Beige from Army Painter. As usual, wipe most of the paint off on a paper towel. Here I even tested it out on my skin just to ensure that I had the proper amount of paint in the bristles. A second pass of dry brushing for visual interest was done using Army Painter's Army Green. After the paint had dried, I decided to do some flocking. I am using Eileen's tacky glue, but any white glue will do the trick. I'm using an old hobby brush to place the glue where I want it and then sprinkle some flock on top. The flock I'm using is Woodland Scenic's Blended Turf. Worth noting is to have a container to catch all of the excess flocking. This way little to nothing goes to waste. Once I had my Griffin all flocked up and ready to go, I diluted the rest of the tacky glue with some good old H2O and very carefully tapped this onto the flocking on the base. Doing this will ensure that you will have no flocking coming loose in the middle of your D&D session. Once that had dried, it was time to bring out all kinds of grass and flower tufts. Even though these tufts have some sort of glue on them, I decided to use white glue to make sure that these would be able to withstand the test of time. I recommend using tweezers to maneuver the tufts into place. It makes the whole process a whole lot easier and more enjoyable. I'm using two basic grass tufts, one lighter green and one a bit darker. I always try to have an uneven amount of tufts since I think it looks more natural. Also, remember that some might be separate while others clump up. That adds to the sort of chaotic and natural feel. I had some red and yellow flowers which I decided to add as well. And yes, of course, I added an uneven amount. So this is what we have so far. I think we're getting close to the finish line. Once the glue on the tufts had dried, I matte varnished the entire model. Here I'm coming in with some gloss varnish from Vallejo. My goal was to primarily focus on the talons, claws, beak, and eyes. But of course, me being me, I had a bunch of varnish left, which made me think that, this mountainside with its moss and vegetation probably is somewhat moist. So I decided to dot in some gloss varnish here and there on the base. So, let's have a look at the final results, shall we? Now for this challenge, I decided to have some rules for myself. First off, I spent approximately the same amount of time as I did with the first Griffin. Secondly, I didn't want to use an airbrush at all. So all of the priming was done with rattle cans. And all of the painting done with a brush. I wanted to do as much as possible to gauge if I had progressed as a miniature painter or not. I am really liking the end result of this. And the cork base looks awesome. I am so happy I tried this. So let's see the two Griffins side by side. I am more beautiful, I am more... Oh, alright good people, that was it. I am happy with the result, and I can see that I have progressed as a miniature painter. The process, however, was nerve-wracking. I felt very anxious, like I said in the intro. This was my first collaboration with any other YouTubers, and I didn't want to disappoint them, and I didn't want to disappoint myself. I think it wasn't until I got the tufts on, or some of the flock, where I felt like, yeah, okay, this is actually better. I haven't regressed as a miniature painter. Now the interesting thing is that feeling, that sensation, it's something that usually happens in all of my miniature painting or terrain crafting projects. The fear, the anxiety, gets sort of replaced by a warm feeling of excitement where I can't wait to present this mini or piece of terrain to my players. Now, far from all of my projects share the same journey. While they always start with anxiety and nerves, they don't always end at that feeling of excitement. Sometimes they end in feelings of failure or even defeat. All kinds of negative feelings just boil up inside until I remember, if your mind is closed, if your attitude is to master everything from the start, you are stopping yourself from even trying or succeeding, which is a shame. If you enter a project thinking you'll master everything from the start, you risk letting mistakes sort of wear you down until you give up. A mistake is an opportunity to learn and to grow. Or like Bob Ross says, we don't make mistakes, we just have happy little accidents. Now, I work as a game designer in the video games industry, where I interact daily with amazingly talented individuals. In our line of work, we see failure as an opportunity to learn, and we also see the value in constructive feedback. If delivered well, it's among the most valuable things you can get as a creative person, as long as you're open to receive it. And if we're not open to examine our flaws, then how can we ever improve? I know it's scary, but
if we want to paint bravely, then surely we must know fear. Frodo's journey to Mordor was neither straight nor easy. He struggled along the way, but he had help from his friends, and in the end the ring fell into the fiery pits of Mount Doom, or whatever the fuck that was, by accident.
So essentially what I'm saying is, go forth, my little Frodos, and remember to listen to your Sams. I know I do. And if these words don't encourage you, then you should always remember that it is just paint splashed on some plastic. You can always paint over what you've done. Heck, worst comes to worst, the paint can be removed. But remember, saving your old minis gives you an excellent chance to look back on your journey and see how far you've come. Because the only person you really should compete with is yourself. Alright, mini painters, so what did you think? Were there any differences between the two Griffins? Please let me know in the comments below. So let's wrap this up. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please give it a like. If you want to see more of these videos, then please consider subscribing and hit that bell icon to make sure that you don't miss any of our videos. There was a whole bunch of talented individuals in this massive collaboration. Links to all of their videos can be found in the description below. Alrighty, so with that, I wish you a great day. Until next time, toodaloo.